Hi all, my name's Jonathan Mamaril and this is the HR Engage podcast. As ever, I'm always excited about our guests, but I'm very excited about our next guest, and that is Nicole Hall. How are you, Nicole?
I'm well, thanks, Jonathan.
Nicole, you've had a fantastic journey through human resources, and you're going to tell us all about that. You've got an amazing experience at that leadership level in regards to human resource and people management. Of course, I could do the whole LinkedIn thing and tell us just do the introduction, but I thought you're here in front of us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Jonathan. I am a lifelong learner. I am still studying now. I started my career really early in the field of economics and investments, and then journeyed across into HR in a bit of a bizarre way, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But most recently have spent the last 6 years of my career in a senior HR role for a retirement living company, but before that have worked in a variety of different industries in senior HR roles, including local government, state government, mining, construction, so a whole vast different arrays of industries, from everything from people, culture, safety. So I just have an immense passion for everything HR, people, safety, wellness related. Love everything about the field.
Now, Nicole, you did touch on there that you had a pretty, I don't know, I wouldn't say a weird journey, but a journey that has had a lot of turns and twists. So give us a little rundown of your journey into human resource and people and culture.
Yeah, look, I did come into a bit of a weird route. I started really early in my career in economics and investments, like I said, and I came into HR through the REM and benefits road. So I realized early in my career that the economics and funds management area didn't give me the connection to people that I was looking for. And I found that through remuneration, where I really got that connection to equality and equity. And it was through that I actually managed to make that jump or leap across into HR, and I really quickly found the love for industrial relations, which is what's really driven me through my career. And I know that a lot of people are probably cringing out there in the HR world at the moment, but it's that side of the dark arts that really gives me the energy and the passion that I love. But I do also love the other part, which is the recruitment part, and I do get great satisfaction from seeing some of the people I've recruited in my career go on to have great careers, all because I've placed them in a role at some point.
Now, before I touch on the dark arts with you, Nicole, I'd like to ask you a little bit about that change from, you had that economics, numbers background, remuneration was you really took a liking to the REM side. So tell us how you went that sort of journey. So you had the economics to the REM and then the REM to really into more generalized HR. What sort of triggered all that for you?
It really, for me, was the passion to make the world a better place.
Mm-hmm.
The economics and investment part, really, after doing it for 7 or 8 years, I realized I was just making money for people who already had money. And in HR is really about, it's a role that comes with great responsibility. You really have the ability to influence businesses and change the way a business operates. And it's a role that has a great level of responsibility with it. Whilst you don't make the decision, you're only there to provide advice to operations people inside a business. How you implement that decision and the advice that you give and the way it's taken has the ability to actually change the way the business operates.
Yep.
But the way you implement that decision has the ability to change someone's life. If you implement a termination badly, that person goes away scarred from that, and you'll impact their life for the rest of their life. If you implement that with respect and integrity and great care, you can change that person's life to make a difference. And I think that's the part of HR that I really enjoy and love. And that's why I went down that road, is that I wanted that connection with people, and I wanted
Yep.
a role where I had the ability to make a difference in the world where I live.
That whole, I suppose, that mantra of making a difference, not just making money for other people, that's definitely something that you were doing previously, but more that mantra of making it better for people in a general sense has led you to that sort of human resources side of things, and I suppose a passion for that. I want to flip that a little bit. So, if that's the case, why do you enjoy, I suppose, the industrial relations? Some would say, and you said, the dark arts side of a human resources so much.
I think because I've definitely seen it done really badly. And I
Yes.
think a lot of industrial relations where it becomes very adversarial is because people don't take the time and the care and compassion to communicate well. And I think if you step back and do industrial relations well, and you build relationships and you communicate really well in that process, and you do it with care and with innovation and with compassion, it can be done really well. And it's about having great intuitive thought. And I have developed an organization called Seven Minds, which is about great intuitive thought. And we focus on an element of that is in industrial relations, and it is about having intuitive, thoughtful solutions. And I think where you bring together safety and the care of people and industrial relations together in one bundle is where you can really get great solutions in that space. So working together in an industrial space rather than trying to compete against each other.
Well, industrial relations is a naturally adversarial area, and not just in the law, but also the results of that and how it affects the workplace as well. You've also really started getting to, especially with Seven Minds now, you've developed that sort of more human resources vantage point. I suppose you talked to us a little bit about why you've got into it, and a bit about your journey, but why is it that you yourself, coming from yourself, why do you enjoy human resources so much? Obviously you've said that you do want to help, but what's the enjoyment factor that you get out of human resources in general?
For me, it's about the fact that you can get results. You can see what happens, and you're really taking care of and looking after the single biggest asset that most companies have. When you're actually taking the time to take great care of that, there's nothing more important than that.
Yeah.
It's the biggest asset that companies will spend money on. And as a parent, there's nothing more important than you'll do than raise your children. And when you're inside an organization, there's nothing more important than organizations will do than caring for their people. So how could you not want to work on that? I just can't see how people wouldn't want to do that.
I think it's a really good point, because there's many schools of thought now around the workplace, because it is changing so much. The industrial level revolution style of the workplace is still there, of course, but it is very much evolving. And definitely COVID and the results of COVID in the workplace has led to many different types of challenges, such as working from home, such as people wanting more in terms of the types of terms and conditions, let alone putting aside things like wages and remuneration and other types of expectations. From your perspective, human resources are going to play a huge part in this evolution of the workplace. From your perspective, what's HR's future involvement going to look like? And obviously, there's technology and everything else that's coming into it. What's your thoughts on its future coming in the next, I don't know, 5, 10 years in the workplace?
I think it will have a greater role. I
Hmm.
think that the ability to attract and retain talent working inside organisations is going to be more and more critical. The way people want to engage and work in organisations is constantly changing and evolving. And I think the way people want to be inside organisations has evolved significantly.
Yeah.
COVID dramatically changed that, but even pieces of legislation like the psychosocial hazard legislation has significantly changed the way organisations are able to operate. And I think for me, my personal view, and I'm probably going to be quite thought provoking for many people, I think that legislation has missed the mark in a few places.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think, yes, it's certainly got parts of it, but I think other parts of that we're yet to see the full impact of that.
Yeah.
For example, there are elements around that legislation that we absolutely needed. But I think other parts of that legislation, so things around the reward and recognition and the job control, I think we're yet to see the impact of that legislation on leadership and management. And I think we will see a change in people wanting to fill those positions in the future because we're yet to see the true impact of how that legislation leads to a great wave of complaints
Mm.
and whistleblower implications and a whole tailspin of how that comes out of that legislation. And I don't quite think that we got that quite right in that legislation. I think the way people of my generation probably view that and how it's applied in the workplace with a different generation is really different.
Yeah.
So I think what we see in reality and the intent of the legislation will be completely different. And I think there's going to have to be some rework of that.
That's a really interesting point because there's very nuanced legislation coming through psychosocial, right to disconnect, even stuff where there's changes around sexual harassment. The legislation has become a lot more nuanced in terms of expectations of
Mm,
employers and much more even setting out positive duties, right? Just to make sure there's
mm,
expectations. From a HR perspective, what does that mean for HR managers, HR execs, officers, coordinators? What does it mean for them? This legislation is just really the tip of the iceberg of what's probably going to come going forward. And once we start catching up with technology as well, the law catches up with technology, even more repercussions. What's HR's role going to be for all those levels going forward, dealing with these nuances?
I think one of the big things is that the what used to be a separation between HR and safety and risk has
Yeah.
really gone. The fact that you used to be able to operate quite separately in those spheres doesn't exist anymore.
Mm,
This
mm.
legislation is now so interwoven between those pieces and even payroll to some extent.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
You used to be able to operate as a standalone HR manager or a standalone payroll manager or a standalone safety manager. That's gone.
Yep.
You need to be a true generalist across all of those pieces and you need to understand the legislation and you need to understand how that will be applied. I think the difficulty is that if you're working for one of the big organisations, you might be able to have different people operating in each of those pods or each of those roles. But if you're a small to medium enterprise who's trying to comply with some of this legislation, it's a big beast for you to
Mm.
try to manage inside that organisation. It's a lot of work for you to comply with. So I think, as you're right, some of this is very nuanced and it relies a lot on the ability for people to use it the way it's intended. And I
Yep.
think we will see a lot of vexatious type complaints come out
Yes.
of people using this legislation not the way it was originally intended. And I've already seen some of those things come out of the psychosocial type legislation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, I want to change track a little bit. I want to do a bit of time travel. I love time travel, of the theory of time travel. But let's time travel a little bit. And if we were to go back to the early career you, Nicole, what advice would you have for the early career Nicole?
Definitely to live more bravely. I think early in my career, I tried to conform. I tried to be more traditional. I tried to be more conservative, and I tried to do what I thought people wanted me to be.
Yeah.
And I think this is common of people when they go through university and they come out and they're very corporate and they think
Yes.
that you have to be what everyone else is. I'm past that now. Now I do what I think I want to be. And I think if I had my time back again, if I was
Yeah.
going back into the past, I would be braver earlier. I wouldn't live with the fear. Now I go, what's the worst that can happen? I'm going to be brave and courageous and just do what I think it is. I have a saying that I apply all the time now, which is don't be mediocre. Forth and be brave and courageous. And I say that to my children all the time. So, yeah, live bravely. Do
The
it. Just go and do it.
And when you say live bravely, because obviously for a lot of maybe early career HR, and I'm talking about not just the ones who've come out of university, but those who pivoted into human resource. Maybe they came from health and safety, maybe they came from a more managerial or operations background, or even payroll, and have really enjoyed HR or different aspects of HR, not necessarily the whole gamut, but aspects of it. What would your advice be for them? Because a lot of them are they're stepping into an area where now there's quite a lot of legislation that's changed,
Hmm.
but also putting that all aside as well, you've got recruitment and retention problems. You have a very different, depending on your industry, you've got workforces that are going up and down. You've got immigration issues as well. The terms that people are putting forward in terms of what they want and what they need, productivity. There's so many competing elements now. What advice would you have for those early career or people who pivoted to a new part as well?
Probably two things, or two or three things, I think, probably. One is
Mm-hmm.
that it's all a cycle. It's
Yeah.
all a
Okay.
great big cycle. I think when you're in those points in your career, you think that it's all happening right now and it's, oh my gosh, it's such a crisis at that point in time. But it's not really. If you look back in history, it's happened before. It's all a big cycle and it will correct itself. Really, like COVID and the fact that we couldn't find people and it was all a big crisis, we had seen that before. If you're old
Mm.
enough and you've been around long enough, it had happened previously. It just hadn't happened quite like that.
Yes.
And it all comes and goes around again. You've just got to wait long enough. It's like fluoro clothing or any of those kind of things. It'll come back again. Just hang on to it in your wardrobe long enough. So just wait. Your hairstyle will come back into fashion, Jonathan. Just wait.
Oh,
Um,
stop.
so the other thing is
Yes.
don't ever be afraid to speak up. So I don't know if you saw the thing on Four Corners about Channel 7 the other
Mm.
night and
Yeah.
the conversation about that. And there was a HR person who said, I should have spoken up. I should have spoken up. That would be my other advice. You have to live with yourself. What you do in your HR career, there'll be points in your career where you'll be up against it and you'll think in your gut, I shouldn't be doing this. I really shouldn't be doing this. But you'll be asked by a leader to do it and it won't feel right. Speak up. Your job is not worth it. There's always another job. Yeah? And I think all the way through my career, I spoke up. I didn't do what I didn't think I should do. So I think speak up because you have to live with yourself at the end of it. And also have a well implemented self-care plan. So that's one of the things we do at
Yeah.
Seven Minds is help people put in place a plan to prevent burnout. And I think HR, like law, is one of those jobs where you carry lots of people's baggage with you. And I think if you don't take care of yourself, no one else is going to. And if you don't have a good plan to look after your own self-care, no one else is going to do it for you. HR, lawyers, doctors, all those type of roles have got a responsibility to make sure you're caring for yourself before you're caring for other people, because you're constantly giving all the time.
That self-care advice coupled with the understanding of there has to be an ability to speak up, or at least a mechanism where you will speak up. I think that's a really good pairing. If you look at a lot of the cases, and look, we look at cases because that is the most extreme, right? They've gone to
Yeah.
an extent. You look at a lot of the cases where HR managers have been sued individually and successfully sued individually. A lot of it was down to, yes, there were some deliberate stuff. Yeah, absolutely deliberate intention. But also a lot of it was more to do with not taking action in a way that would have been reasonable considering the circumstances. And a lot of that really is just ignoring the issue. But the problem with that is that those issues then manifest. And I think human resources nowadays need to take, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, need to take a bit more of a stand because the information is a bit more widely available to understand where your liability and risk lies. That's obviously a big challenge. And talk about challenges. You've obviously switched from long time. I know you had regional experience. You've had different types of industry experience. You've spent the last, I think, 6 or so years at your last role in a very much HR leadership role. So I suppose now for you, what are the biggest challenges you're facing now in human resources and how are you tackling it?
I think a couple of things. One is probably the biggest challenge I see at the moment is a misalignment between the traditional framework of investigations and the whistleblower framework and the obligations organisations have for wellness, safety and
Yeah,
mental health of
yeah, yeah.
people involved in investigations. And it's something that I care very strongly about. And
Mm-hmm.
it's part of why I started Seven Minds. I can't stand by and let things like that go unchanged. It's part of why I'm driven to make Seven Minds a reality. It is my philosophy to change the things that I think I need to change to make the world a better place. And at Seven Minds, we've developed a care, compassion and culture-based approach to investigation, which is very much about taking care of the individual through that investigation approach. And rather than standing someone down and leaving them for weeks at a time, which we've seen the Commission be really anti that approach
Mm.
in recent cases, it's really about taking care of the emotional, mental and physical support of people through that approach, making sure that the investigation's still got integrity,
Yep.
but making sure that we've got support mechanisms in place to offer more than just EAP, right? And really taking a very strong care-based approach. I have seen in my career of over 20 odd years some really damaged people come out of investigations. And it's time that we stopped that approach. You can see marriages just break down from sexual
Mm.
harassment complaints, but at the end of it, there's no real outcome that comes out of those. It's horrendous the way we have let this and still let this process work. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges we will face
Mm-hmm.
as a technical profession, the need to change this.
I suppose that is a challenging area considering we've got now even further sexual harassment law changes now. Obviously, a lot of high profile cases have led to these changes. I suppose the other thing from our standpoint is, and you've said a few things maybe that HR people might disagree with you about, but what is another thing about human resources that you might say or have thought about that people might disagree with you about?
I think the other thing that I really strongly disagree about is the legislation change which removed the ability to use non-disclosure agreements in sexual harassment cases. I
Mm-hmm.
think that has a pretty significant risk attached to it. I think there's a view that people have the right to know if someone has been through that process, but I also
Yeah.
think there's a flip side where there are a lot of, and I've seen quite a few vexatious or unproven claims, or claims that really, it's really someone's whole career is going to be impacted to such a significant extent when that comes out. And I think there's grounds for that to still be in play. So I do think that's going to be very controversial, my view on that, Jonathan.
Yeah, Victoria at the moment are looking at gaining some, they're going through a consultation process with stakeholders. It's going to be very interesting to see what the results of that consultation process will be and the limitations are going to put on any NDAs or deeds going forward. And then, of course, what other states follow. And I could probably rope in workplace bullying in the same sort of breath as well.
Yeah.
Those two areas have a significant ability to damage someone's career almost indefinitely. And that's even putting aside that it could be weaponized and has been weaponized already. There's been a lot of weaponization of these claims. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens going forward. Obviously, this is a result of the many high-profile cases, and also, I suspect, a lot of cases that will involve big corporate names and big brand names going forward. There are a few in the works going forward in the next 12 to 18 months. So we will see. Definitely a wait and see approach on that one. Let's switch tack a little bit, because part of the HR Engage podcast tradition is we have a bit of a rapid questions section. So basically, I'm going to ask you some questions. First thing comes to your mind, and we'll go from there. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay. Firstly, what is your favorite movie?
Oh, I'm not much of a movie watcher, to be honest.
Right.
I grew up without television for a number
Okay.
of years. But if I did have to watch a movie, it would probably have to be the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh, wow. We're going back in time a little bit, but I do remember that movie. It also is not a movie I want to show my kids, but yes, it's a great movie. Great movie. Great musical. Loved it. What is your favorite holiday destination? I know you do a little bit of traveling, Nicole.
Yeah, my husband and I are definitely road trippers. So anywhere in Australia, probably. We do like to get in the car and just drive and then stay wherever takes our fancy. So we've seen pretty much all of Queensland.
Wow.
So, yeah, we're definitely jump in the car and just head off.
Is there a particular destination that has just embedded in your memory?
Oh, Port Douglas. We're massive
lovely.
fans of anywhere up that way. So, yeah.
For those Port Douglas listeners, you got a shout out from Nicole there. Apart from family and friends, who has inspired you the most?
I love reading any kind of biography or autobiography, and Edith Cowan is an absolute amazing woman. If you don't know much about her, she's on the $50 note. She was the person who was the first woman elected to Parliament, and she was elected in 1921, which was the year that my grandfather was born.
Wow.
And so if you think about it, that's only 2 generations ago for me. And so she was instrumental in really setting up women's rights in Australia, the health, education, and women being able to actually work at the same level as men in Australia. So absolutely fabulous woman, and we all should know more about her.
That's fantastic. And what is the thing you do outside of work that you're passionate about or keeps you going?
Reading and listening to podcasts.
Yes.
And poetry. So I write poetry and read poetry.
Oh, wow. I was going to ask you to tell us something a bit about yourself that people don't know about you. That surprised me for sure. Poetry. Is there anything else?
I'm absolutely fascinated in so I have a hypnotherapist, and it has amazed me. This is only a recent thing for me.
Yes.
It has amazed me how much you can learn about yourself via hypnotherapy.
Wow.
There you go. I would recommend it for everybody.
Hypnotherapy. You said you're a voracious reader. What books do you like reading? What's one of your favorite books?
Oh, anything that's about self-help, motivation, or any autobiography or any story of anybody's life, I'm absolutely fascinated by. The book that I have just finished reading is a book I found in one of those community libraries, which anytime I see one of those, I like veer off the street and stop and go through it. And I carry books around in the boot of my car so I can put one in when I take one out. The book I just finished reading was a book called Crossing the Dead Heart by C.J. Madigan, and
Okay.
it's from like 1947, and it's
Right.
about walking across the Simpson Desert. So it
Oh,
was
right.
fascinating because I also have this bit of fascination with camels and walking across the desert with camels and stuff. So it was great. But my go-to book of all time is a book called The Motivation Manifesto by Brendan Burchard. And it's the book that like I read when I like want to get hyped up to do stuff.
That's in terms of the trend that I talk when I'm talking to people on this podcast. There seems to be a big trend around the ability to get not just motivation, but also inspiration from outside influences, not necessarily in the HR space or in the workplace, but something outside, not even in business, but outside of that, people who have done an amazing feat or a sport or something like that seems to be a bit of a trend. And I suppose that's another one there. So just that book again, was it Motivation Manifesto?
Yeah, Motivation
Mm.
Manifesto by Brendan Burchard. And he's a guy who was in a car accident in his 20s, and he decided he would live his life around three principles: live, love, matter. So all he does basically, he's now like a motivational speaker,
Yeah.
and he decided to rewire his life around those three principles. And he has a podcast. He's American. He has a podcast and a planner and a whole range of things. But he's a very American motivational speaker, so I really like him.
Oh, fantastic. I suppose one more question, if I may, Nicole. If there was one inspirational quote or a moment of inspiration you'd like to leave with us, what would that be?
It has to be the quote by Steve Jobs. The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And I think that probably sums me up in a quote. Not that I think I'm anywhere near Steve Jobs, but I am one of those people. My husband, who is absolutely my biggest champion and probably my sanity, is the person who actually says to me all the time, hang on, just one idea at a time. Because I'm the person that has all these crazy ideas and comes up with all these amazing things to do. So I'm the person who goes, yeah, but we can just change the world. We'll just do this and do this and do this. I'm that person who thinks we should just change the world. It's okay. It'll all be all right. That definitely sums me up in a quote.
Nicole, that probably sums up as well our conversation because I suppose one of the key things I got out of our conversation, and I'm hoping one of the nuggets that the listeners have got out of it is this whole idea that don't be afraid to do something a little bit different and not be the same, but also to speak up. And I think that's that balance there. Not be afraid to do something different and be a little bit different, but also to be able to speak up and have those mechanisms to speak up. The other thing as well that I got as well from what you're saying, in particular about HR, is that there are going to be some nuances and changes, and we're seeing that now. There's weaponization of all that, but it's a cycle, and we've seen this type of stuff happen before. Sure, it's a little bit different context and everything else, but you're saying it's a cycle. There's ways to deal with it. There's mechanisms to deal with it, and that whole principle of seven minds that the consultancy that you've started, it is really on that train of thought. Any other last points to bring up?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a journey, which is what Seven Minds is definitely built around. Like you say, we have seen it before, and
Mm,
I think as HR practitioners, we shouldn't be frightened to take ideas or concepts
yeah.
from other industries, apply them to wherever we are, and think outside the box. I think through my career, what I've done is tried to think of solutions, and I still do it now. Think of solutions that bring together the principles of communication, compassion, care into whatever I'm doing, because at the end, what are we managing? People. The product is people. So treat them with kindness. Bring a bit of love into what we're doing and take care of the asset that we're looking after. That's really what it's about.
That's some great last points there, Nicole. Really appreciate it. So, Nicole Hall, thank you so much for coming on to the HR Engage podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonathan.
So that is it again for another episode of the HR Engage podcast. Speak soon.